This is the Italian Citizenship Podcast, hosted by Marco Permunian and Rafael Di Furia. Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the Italian Citizenship Podcast, presented by ItalianCitizenshipAssistance.com. Of course, we are back here again with Italian attorney from ItalianCitizenshipAssistance.com, Marco Permunian. How you doing, man?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Anyway, today we wanted to have a discussion, a very important discussion on the topic of discrepancies, something that many of us who have gone through Italian citizenship will be very familiar with. Maybe not everybody, but I would assume at least a good portion of us have at least dealt with something minor. So, Marco, when you come across somebody who has some discrepancies in their family line, what is it that you first do? Or where is it that things start out for you and your team?
Well, I believe for sure the most important aspect that we can talk about is whether these discrepancies, which a lot of people have in their documents, are going to impact their ability to apply for citizenship. Let me start off by saying that not all the types of discrepancies will prevent you from getting citizenship or are worthwhile amending. There are some discrepancies on your documents which the consulate is going to likely accept, even if you don't amend the documents and correct the discrepancies. Now, whether or not the consulate is going to accept a specific type of discrepancy is very much up to their discretion, so it's very difficult to imagine or predict. But, from experience, you tend to know which discrepancies the consulate is more likely to accept. For example, if your ancestor was born as Antonio and now he goes by Anthony, and in all of his documents he's named and referred to as Anthony, it is possible and likely that the consulate is not going to raise any issues and that your application will be accepted. Whereas if your ancestor on his death certificate has a completely wrong date of birth or age at the time of the death that doesn't match really with the birth certificate, that could be a bigger problem that could be worthwhile amending. And that is a discrepancy that I consider to be a mid-tier discrepancy, something that, yes, could potentially affect your application, but it can be easily corrected. There are some cases instead where there are clearly much bigger discrepancies and inconsistencies in the documents, and some of them may be amended, some others may not be amended. You have to check whether the state in which the document that you're trying to amend allows for amendments or no. Some states do allow for amendments, but only on specific documents, only to specific information on the document. So you may be able to amend a misspelling in the last name, but you may not be able to amend a completely different last name. So it really depends on the state that you're dealing with. And the consulate may or may not accept documents with major discrepancies.
Interesting. And so once you've found these discrepancies, you've discerned whether it is a smaller discrepancy, which might not be that big of a deal, a mid-tier, or a major discrepancy. How do you decide what is the best way of moving forward? Is it based on where the person is applying, either in the consulate or municipality, or is it just kind of across the board that these things sort of tend to fall into these major categories?
For sure, where the person is applying plays a major role. So there are places where you can apply and that are knowingly more lenient in terms of evaluation of documents and discrepancies. There are some other places where are knowingly very strict about discrepancies. So they may be bothered even by something that I would consider a minor discrepancy. So that, of course, plays a major role where the person is applying. And secondly, I believe that it needs to be clarified whether the amendment is even possible or easy to do, because, for example, generally speaking, to amend marriage records, it may be more difficult than amending, for example, death certificates. Some states will tell you the only pieces of information on a marriage record that they will amend Some states will not allow any type of amendments on marriage record. For instance, the explanation that they give could be because that's the information that the spouses gave when they got married. Sometimes it depends on how old the document is, so they may allow amendments to more recent documents and not allow amendments to older documents, or the ability to amend the document may be connected to whether or not the person who is named on the record is alive and can sign to request the amendment, or if the person is deceased, or if there is a next of kin or somebody that can be considered a next of kin who is alive to request the amendment. For example, in death certificates, in the case of death certificates, sometimes they allow the informant to file for an amendment if the informant is the person who gave the information who can be proven is wrong. So a lot of different scenarios. You have to understand if the amendment is necessary, if it's absolutely necessary. If it's easy or difficult to do it, in some cases, it may be required to get a court order just to amend the document. In some cases, it may not even be sufficient a court order. So they may not allow to amend the document, not even if you go through a very expensive and long process through the courts in the US. So ultimately, it really does depend on the specific case, on the specific circumstances, on the place where you're applying. And it's a combination of these factors that we evaluate to see what is the best path forward when there are discrepancies. And just one last point to really answer your question. There are some situations where it's not possible to amend any of the documents. Maybe the last name was a certain last name and then it was changed over time. So all of the people in the Italian line got the wrong last name. So it's not even possible to amend all the documents down to the applicant because it would cause problems to the applicant who has been known with that last name for years, and his father was known with that last name. So you can't really amend all the documents. So in that case, if the consulate is really not accepting that discrepancy, you may have to obtain a one and the same court order. So have a U.S. court establish the identity of all the individuals in the Italian line, or some of them, based on the documents that you present, which do have discrepancies, but you present additional proof, evidence that those people are exactly those individuals. There are discrepancies, yes, but you can still connect the dots, and the court will establish that the identity of the individuals, and then the consulate will most likely accept the decision of the court. Of course, it's like a last resort, like something that you do when you don't have any more options.
Interesting. And so when you're going through this, say it's a regular amendment, how would you go about requesting this to be made?
So normally what you have to do is you have to request the record first. Then you realize that there is an amendment to be done, and then you file for an amendment through the same office which released the record to you. This, of course, unless you already have maybe an older copy of the record in question, maybe you have an older copy of your father's birth certificate, so you already know there's discrepancy. So in that case, it's not really necessary to request the record. You can just proceed straight to the amendment. So you mail in normally a request addressed to the Vital Statistic Office or to the state registrar, whichever office has issued the record and has the ability to amend the documents, which depending on the state, it could be the county, it could be at the city level or at the state level. And you have to provide documentary evidence of the error on the document. And it's best, of course, to just read the guidelines before you submit an amendment request, because you have to understand if the amendment is even possible or if it's likely to happen. And once you have to determine that it is, or for our clients, once we have determined that it is possible to ask for such an amendment, we mail in a request. There's a fee to be paid, normally through a money order, and a form to be filled out. Sometimes they use the form that you fill out to and they attach it to the record itself. So when you request a new certified copy of the record, you'll get the misspelled record and the form that you filled out listing all the mistakes. For example, like field A includes a misspelling and the right spelling should be this one. Sometimes they manually correct the information on the original record. So when you request the record after the amendment, you can expect, for example, the wrong information to be crossed out, and on top of it, they just list the correct information, like the correct spelling of the last name or the correct date of birth. And that's how you go about requesting amendments through the same office, normally through the same office which released the record that you're trying to amend.
That's fascinating. And actually, I had to deal with some discrepancies in my family line, but not just my family line, but also for myself. There was on my birth certificate, there was a mistake that was made, and I called up the state of Georgia, or I don't remember if it was a county clerk or whatever it was, and I said, well, hey, look, there's this mistake here. They looked in their system. They said, oh, you know what? That's our fault. We'll send it to you, no cost. Don't worry about it. So I got that document. And what I saw also was on the document from the state of Georgia is that if there's an annotation or a change that's made that's necessary, that they will actually include that all on the same document rather than you having to have multiple documents, the court order, this order, that order, and all the intermediary documents from one document to the next, from the original document to the corrected document. It's all reflected there. So even from state to state in the United States, what you might get from one state can be completely different from the other. And that's just something that I've seen from my personal story, because nobody else in my family had a document that even showed corrections or anything, all reflected in one document, because I was the only one born in the state of Georgia. But that's a completely different story. Anyway, so kind of building off of that idea, having dealt with some of these issues myself of discrepancies on my own documents, is that a situation that you run into from time to time, finding that your clients will have on their personal documents some corrections that might need to be made?
Yes, we have had quite a few cases where the discrepancies were not only on the older records, but also on the applicant's records, like his marriage record, his kids' birth certificates. Now, even on their passport, so the name on the passport didn't really match the name on the birth certificate. For example, the middle name was missing. Now, it may be to some extent an acceptable situation in the US, but unfortunately in Italy, they're very, very strict about the documentation pertaining to the applicant itself. So it's very important that the first name, middle name, and last name of the applicant is the same in all of his documents. So his birth certificate, his ID, his American passport, his marriage record, his kids' birth certificates. Now, luckily, it is normally much easier to amend these documents pertaining to the applicant rather than potentially amending the older documents. So it is definitely my advice to, even before you start the process, or if you're using our services, that you make sure that your name and last name and date of birth, that all of your personal information matches on all of your most important documents. And if not, you will have to amend them, or we can amend them for you, and to make sure that all of these documents report the same information.
That's interesting. Actually, just after asking that question, I remembered a situation with someone who I know, a woman, and I think this is also somewhat common as well, born with her birth name, gets married, gets divorced, gets married again, and then gets divorced again. This individual had the issue that their current name and their birth name are the exact same. However, because of how name changes sometimes are handled in the United States, just simply by common law or just simple usage of the name, or even going to the DMV and saying, hey, I'm divorced, like, give me my maiden name back. There wasn't a paper trail to prove that the person with name A was the same person as person A, that there was that disconnection. Because I forget exactly how it went, but for this individual, they had the difficulty to show that the person who they had become, quote unquote, their new name, wasn't their current name. So they, because of this inability to show all of the documentation in between, even though Jane Smith was Jane Smith, they weren't sure, is she Jane Smith, Jane Jones, Jane whoever?
That's an excellent point. Actually, unfortunately, it's a very common situation. I have clients who were born, like with a name and a middle name and a last name, but they've always gone by their middle name. So they were born John Michael, but now on their official documents, it's only Michael and the last name. And they're like, hey, this is my name. And I'm like, yes, but on your birth certificate, you have a different name. But I've always been called, by people by my middle name.
Right.
But unfortunately, this may be acceptable in the US, but in Italy, it's absolutely not acceptable. And it's necessary to either go back to your original name or maybe go through a name change process in the US through the court, so that there is like you just said, a paper trail between your name at birth and the name that you're using now, that you're legally using now, that needs to be changed through a court order at least.
Right. And that's something that's also, I think, it seems to stem from maybe potentially a cultural aspect, which probably also has to do coming from the legal aspect as well, that people in Italy just don't change their names. Women who get married don't change their names. People don't change their names professionally, at least as far as I'm aware. Maybe a couple of people might have a stage name, but even then, people have their actual name out there.
Well, that's an interesting point, because in Italy, you can't really legally change your name. You can do it abroad and make the name change decree valid in Italy. That's possible. But as far as changing your name in Italy, that's not a possibility, legally speaking. You can change your name if you are in danger, if your name is funny, too funny.
But that's extremely rare, if I'm not mistaken, no?
Exactly. Like it's something that, it's a very rare scenario.
Because I remember hearing once that even like someone who was like in witness protection, I don't know if this story is true, but their name really should have been changed. But there's the local police or government, whoever was in charge of this, said, yeah, no, it's like it's serious, but it's not serious enough. It's interesting that people just don't change. So that, especially for women who come to get their Italian citizenship recognized, many I've seen go through the situation where they're freaking out. It's like, wait, but my name is Mary Smith, but I was born Mary Jones, but why are they recognizing me as Mary Jones and not Mary Smith? Because I am Mary Smith. What's going on? This is the wrong name. I have a new name now. I'm married. This is who I am. But Italy doesn't recognize the change there. They recognize what is on your birth certificate, because like we were talking about before, women in Italy, when they get married, they don't change their last name.
Exactly. So you will get Italian citizenship under the name that you have on your birth certificate if you're a married woman.
Well, anyway, I think this is actually a great place to end off the episode. Fascinating conversation. And if people are interested in your services and need help going through this process for Italian citizenship, maybe they've got some discrepancies, maybe they don't, how can they get in contact with you and your team to find all of this out?
People can contact us through our website, Italiancitizenshipassistance.com. They can contact us through the contact form on the website, or give us a call. The number is on the website.
Oh, absolutely fantastic. And of course, if you're interested in more conversations like this about Italian dual citizenship, be sure that you are subscribed to this YouTube channel, or if you're listening to this as an audio-only podcast, be sure that you're subscribed and or following on your favorite podcasting platform of choice. But there is the little bonus that if you are subscribed on YouTube, that you are also subscribed to the Italian Real Estate Podcast, another project that Marco and I collaborate on and have so much fun doing, where we talk about everything related to being able to live in Italy, practically speaking. Of course, also, if you're interested in more conversations about life in Italy, living in Italy, and Italian dual citizenship, living as an Italian dual citizen expat here in Italy, be sure to come over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia, where I get out and even show you a little bit more of this beautiful country that both Marco and I call home. Of course, we've been here again with Marco Permunian. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you all next time. Later.
Thank you.